I used to think of myself as an architect of ordinary, dependable things. I built dinners that felt like small ceremonies, a linen closet that always smelled faintly of lavender, and a life arranged with the kind of tidy precision that makes other people say, "You've got it all together." At 44, I wore my days like a well-cut coat, comfortable, useful pockets for small consolations, sleeves hemmed to exactly the right length. Marcus was my constant for nearly 2 decades. Lydia was the friend I called when I needed nonsense at 3 a.m. or sympathy at 3 in the afternoon. We were a triangle that felt inevitable. So when the first hairline crack appeared, it did so in the language of the domestic, a hotel loyalty email that pinged a card we shared, an unfamiliar lipstick mark on a wine glass, a habit of leaving a light on that suddenly became suspicious. I told myself the stories women tell themselves to keep the world moving, that I was tired, that memory slips happen, that curiosity can be a dangerous lens that turns shadows into shapes. I wanted to keep the coat unstitched, to keep things neat and whole. But once you start cataloging small anomalies, you begin to read them as sentences. Betrayal wasn't a plot twist in my life. It was something I had witnessed in novels and nodded at from the safety of other people's chapters. In real life, the shock is twofold. Not only does trust break, but the person who broke it knows the architecture of your vulnerabilities. They know your anniversaries, the way you forgive, the places where you keep your secrets. When a close neighbor becomes a stranger with your keys to the house, the sensation is peculiar and dizzying. I remember a particular autumn evening, the house ordered, but the air between the rooms thin with possibility. I sat on the edge of our bed and thought about how people hold each other, hands across a table, the weight of a palm on a chair back, the small rituals that stitch two lives together. I also thought about how thin those stitches can be. In a hollow between two ordinary breaths, I felt the first draft of a storm. I didn't yet know whether I would fold, flee, or learn how to fight in ways I'd never imagined. I only knew that the decision would change everything. Suspicion arrived not with a shout, but with the soft persistence of a dripping faucet. The first tangible thing I could point to was an envelope, the kind hotels send with chocolates tucked inside. It sat on the kitchen counter one Tuesday morning, half hidden beneath the grocery list. The return address had Lydia's handwriting, round, slanted, instantly familiar. The hotel logo sealed the flap. My throat tightened in that unspectacular, cold way that makes your lungs forget how to take a proper breath. I told myself to be reasonable. I called Marcus at work. "Did you stay at the Langley last weekend?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "No," he said, and there was that slight office hum behind him, the kind of background that makes a person sound both busy and innocent. "Why?" "Envelope," I said. "Found it here." He promised to check. When he came home, he brought a practice story about a client dinner and errands eaten by an overcrowded inbox. I wanted to believe him so badly that my faith felt almost like a physical ache. I wanted the world to stay the way it had been, predictable and kind. I have a drawer where I keep small things, paper clips, warranty cards, that habit of filing practicalities like prayers. I found the envelope there and smoothed the paper between my fingers. Inside was a short note, warm, casual, Lydia talking about an art show and saying she hoped to see me. Always, L. The stationery carried an imprint of a suite number I didn't recognize. Details are threads. You can tug lightly without consequence, or you can tug at the wrong place and watch the whole sweater peel away. Prudence whispered that I should let it be. Curiosity, and a grief that already felt like preemption, told me to look closer. So I started cataloging. Small things at first. Who texted when, credit card charges that came in late at night, the different scent on Marcus's coat after trips. I noticed Lydia's laughter shifting lately, how it sat at the edge of conversations rather than being their center. I watched how she avoided my eyes at book club and how she used the word busy like a curtain. None of that is proof. None of that is a smoking gun. It's pattern recognition, the body's way of telling you something that your brain hasn't yet allowed itself to know. I confronted him over cold tea one evening. I tried to frame it like care. Is there something you want to tell me? I kept my voice soft because I wanted the truth more than I wanted drama. Marcus's face folded closed, a practiced shudder. He denied it with an ease that suggested practice. Called it a misunderstanding, an overread of ordinary things. His denial was a missed hand when I reached for it. I felt the loneliness that arrives when one person in a long partnership knows how to protect a lie. I could have screamed. I could have left. Instead, I put the envelope back in the drawer and began to watch. The betrayal that comes from a friend cuts different. I always thought of Lydia as the person who could read the weather in my face, who could tell when I needed a sixth cup of coffee and when I needed silence. She'd been there in the hospital waiting room the night Marcus had a minor surgery. She'd held my hand through my mother's funeral and laughed when I wanted to laugh and cried when I did. That's why the discovery felt like two knives at once, one sharp because of him and the other because of her. It happened by accident, or maybe by something that wants to be found. I was sorting through the photos on my phone, trying to assemble a slide for Marcus's 40th at the end of the month, a thing of love and small jokes. My thumb hesitated over a recent image, and, because I'm the kind of person who thinks in lists, I tapped Lydia's name to pull up the photos she'd tagged. There, between a shot of the book club beach picnic and a casserole she swore she'd never make again, was a photograph of Marcus in a suit he wore to the charity gala, except in this photo he looked different, candid, and private. Standing close to Lydia on a balcony, their shoulders touching in a way I'd never seen him touch me. The image itself was small and unadorned. The danger wasn't a dramatic kiss. It was in the casualness of the closeness, the way their bodies fit as if they'd been practicing. My heart did something I hadn't felt since I was a child falling down a flight of stairs, a slow, dull ache that lives in the teeth and the jaw. I scrolled. There were more images, late-night selfies with the hotel suite number faint in the background, a cropped ticket stub, a coffee cup with lipstick on the rim. Messages followed, an exchange that was light, then intimate, then flippant in a way that felt rehearsed. I remember the afternoon I confronted Lydia because I wanted the luxury of outrage. We sat on her porch in folding chairs that had known our summers. I told her I'd seen the photos. She fumbled with the hem of her sleeve, that same sleeve she'd used to wipe tears from my face more times than I could count. Her eyes went flat for a beat and then glassy. It didn't mean anything, she said, the old justifications dressed up in new clothes. It was complicated. I care about you. I care about him. We didn't set out to hurt you. The words slid off like rain from a waxed coat. It's one thing when a partner lies. You can imagine motives, spring from a place of selfishness or weakness. It's another when the person who has seen you in your worst and your best makes choices that imply your worst is the only version of you worth betraying. A friend's betrayal felt like a map with all the landmarks removed. I left Lydia's porch with my hands empty and a small, fierce plan anchoring itself in my chest. I would not let memory be gaslit. I would not let my years of shared jokes and hospital waiting rooms become collateral. If the photographs and messages were the threads, I was going to follow them, not out of petty revenge, but to understand the whole pattern. To see who did what, when, and why. To decide, with my eyes open, what to do next. I didn't sleep much after that day on Lydia's porch. The house felt foreign, like a stage set left after the actors had gone home. The bed was too wide. The smell of Marcus's cologne clung to the curtains, and every drawer I opened seemed to whisper, "You didn't see it coming." When I looked back, the signs had been there all along, just rearranged into the shape of normal life. The weekends at the office, the soft shift in his laughter, how he started locking his phone. Lydia had begun canceling plans at the last minute, blaming headaches, deadlines, her sister's drama. I'd believed every word because belief was easier than suspicion. Belief meant I could keep being the woman who trusted, the woman who didn't check phones or follow credit card trails. Now I became a collector of evidence. I started small. Receipts tucked in pockets, late-night texts that lit up his phone when he showered, the faint traces of a woman's perfume that wasn't mine. I didn't confront him again, not yet. I listened instead. I learned that silence is a kind of power. I even began taking notes, writing them down in the back of my planner under fake grocery lists. Langley Hotel, June 4th. Call from work, 9:22 p.m. Lydia, online same time. Charge from Bella Ristorante, table for two. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the list, but it grounded me. Proof was oxygen. At first, anger gave me energy, a sharp, clean fire that kept me upright. But grief came after, heavier and duller. I found myself crying over strange things, a mug we'd bought in Italy, the old playlist that still sat on my phone. I realized I wasn't just mourning Marcus and Lydia. I was mourning the version of myself that had felt safe with them. I started avoiding both of them, saying I was busy with work. When Lydia texted, I replied politely, never warmly. When Marcus tried to hug me, I tensed, pretending not to notice my own stiffness. One evening, he looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You've been distant." I wanted to laugh. Distant? I'd been orbiting a different planet entirely. But I only said, just tired. That night, when he slept, I turned on his laptop. I knew his password, a small detail he'd never thought to change. Inside, the truth waited patiently. I found folders of travel receipts, private messages, even a few photos too intimate to mistake. The pain was sharp but clarifying. It was like standing in a cold shower after months of fog. I closed the computer gently and sat there in the dim blue glow, the room spinning with equal parts heartbreak and precision. I realized then that betrayal has stages. The first is disbelief. The second is humiliation. But the third, the one that changes everything, is purpose. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. Not a scene, not a scream, not the messy revenge of a soap opera. Something quieter. Smarter. A dismantling of the story they had written without me, and a reclamation of my own. That morning, I went for a walk before sunrise. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. I kept the secret for almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks of pretending to sleep beside him, of stirring coffee in silence, of watching Lydia's name flash across my phone and letting it ring until it stopped. Secrets rot if you hold them too long. They start to seep into everything, your posture, your voice, the way you look at yourself in the mirror. It was a Sunday morning when the silence finally cracked. Our daughter, Emma, was home from college, all energy and unfiltered honesty. She noticed everything, the tension in the air, the pauses between our words, the way I set Marcus's plate a little too far from mine. "What's going on with you two?" she asked, halfway through breakfast, her fork suspended over her eggs. I didn't plan to tell her. But something inside me, maybe exhaustion, maybe the slow poisoning of pretense, took over. "Your father," I said, my voice too calm, "has been seeing someone else." The words hung there like a bell still ringing. Marcus looked up, startled, his face pale and open like a man who'd been caught mid-theft. "Claire," he began, but I raised a hand. "Don't," I said. "Please. Not now." Emma's eyes widened. "Who?" she whispered. I hesitated. Saying Lydia's name out loud felt like breaking a second bone before the first had healed. But the truth was already out. To muffle it now would be cowardice. "Lydia," I said softly. "It's been going on for months." For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma pushed back her chair so hard it scraped the floor. She didn't cry, she went very still, her jaw set, her hands shaking. "I don't understand you," she said to Marcus. "She's Aunt Lydia. You let her into our house." He tried to speak, but she was already gone, her footsteps on the stairs a series of slammed doors. The rest of the day felt like walking through smoke. I called my sister Karen because she'd always been my steady one, the person who didn't flinch from bad news. When I told her, she exhaled a long, low sound, then said, "You don't deserve that, Claire. You never did." Hearing it from someone else made it real in a way that my own discovery hadn't. By evening, word had begun to spread, not by my choice, but because small towns have their own oxygen. One of the book club women texted, "I'm so sorry, honey." I heard. The next day, two neighbors crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Lydia must have felt it too, because she stopped posting online. Her world, like mine, was beginning to collapse under the weight of whispers. Marcus tried to apologize that night, his words careful and strategic, as if he were negotiating terms instead of atoning for wreckage. "It wasn't love," he said. "It just happened. I was lonely, Claire. You were distant." I almost laughed. "You cheated because I didn't fill your silence for you? That's not loneliness, Marcus. That's cowardice." He started to cry, not the tears of remorse, but the tears of a man frightened of consequence. I watched him, strangely detached, as if I were studying someone else's husband. For years, I'd been the caretaker of his emotions, the translator of his moods. That night, I realized I was done. Later, when I climbed into bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick. The house felt different, lighter, though still wounded. Truth does that. It hurts like a burn, then it clears the air. The next morning, I made coffee, opened the curtains, and began a new list in my planner. Not of proof this time, but of plans. Steps. Actions. It was time to move from reaction to response. And I already knew exactly where I would start. The days that followed felt like walking through a house after a fire, the walls still standing, but everything inside coated in ash. I moved through my routines like a ghost. I still went to work, still answered emails, still smiled when colleagues asked how I was, but underneath, I was hollow. Every sound seemed too loud, every kindness undeserved. The whispers had grown legs. The story, our story, had become public property. People love a betrayal when it isn't theirs. They dissect it, assign blame, decide who deserves sympathy and who doesn't. Some of the women from book club texted me polite condolences, their messages sugar-coated and careful. "You're so strong, Claire," they said. "You'll come out of this better." Others didn't text at all. Lydia had gone silent, but I could feel her ghost in every sideways glance. I found out she'd taken a leave of absence from work. Marcus moved into a rented apartment downtown to give us space. He left his wedding ring on the counter next to his coffee mug, like a man setting down a burden he no longer wanted to carry. I stared at that small circle of metal for a long time before I picked it up and dropped it into a drawer. It clinked against the back wall like punctuation. At night, I couldn't sleep. My body remembered every detail of what had been stolen, the smell of him, the way Lydia laughed in our kitchen, the echo of their lies overlapping with my own memories. Grief has a strange rhythm. It comes in waves, and just when you think you've learned how to swim, it drags you under again. One evening, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on the porch alone. The air was cool, the world unnervingly calm. I thought about who I had been, the woman who trusted, who believed that decency was a kind of armor. I missed her, but I also pitied her. She had built her safety on the idea that love, if tended carefully enough, could not rot. Emma came outside, barefoot, her eyes red from crying. "I talked to Dad," she said quietly. I didn't ask what he'd said. I already knew. Marcus had always been persuasive, especially when cornered. "Do you hate him?" she asked. The question was simple, but I couldn't answer. Hate required energy, and I was running on fumes. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate him. I just don't recognize him anymore." She nodded slowly, sat beside me, and slipped her hand into mine. We sat in silence for a long time, two women, one younger, one older, both learning that love could betray without warning. When she went back inside, I opened my laptop. The same device that had revealed his lies now became my tool of resurrection. I started researching divorce attorneys, property laws, shared accounts. I wasn't sure yet if I wanted revenge or freedom, maybe both, but I knew one thing: I would not drown in his decisions. As the clock struck midnight, I found an old photo on my desktop, Marcus and me at the Langley Gala, smiling, our hands linked. I stared at it for a while, then pressed delete. It felt small but real. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her voice was steady, no nonsense. "You're making the right choice," she said. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just finally making a choice mine. And as I hung up, I realized something quietly powerful. Falling wasn't the end. It was the beginning of gravity teaching you how to stand again. There's a strange clarity that comes after devastation, the way air feels crisp after a thunderstorm. For the first time in months, my thoughts lined up instead of circling endlessly. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. Rage burns fast and leaves you hollow. What I felt now was colder, quieter. Purpose. Mornings became my ritual of recovery. I'd wake before sunrise, make coffee, and write in my notebook, not a diary of grief, but a blueprint. Step 1. Secure finances. Step 2. Gather proof. Step 3. Control the narrative. I realized that power doesn't come from hurting someone back. It comes from making their lies irrelevant. My lawyer, Julia, was brisk and efficient, the kind of woman who had seen every variety of betrayal and no longer flinched. She reviewed Marcus's assets, advised me on the house, the accounts, the car registered in both our names. "You'll need evidence," she said, tapping her pen on the table. "Emails, photos, transactions. Anything that proves infidelity." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I have plenty." Collecting it had once felt pathetic. The late-night screenshots, the bank statements, the envelope in the drawer. Now it felt like armor. Proof was protection. Proof meant I could move strategically, not reactively. While Julia handled the legal battle, I worked on the social one. Lydia had always cared deeply about appearances. Her career depended on it. She ran a boutique marketing firm, built on image and reputation. Her clients adored her polished charm. I knew the quiet language of her world, how one whisper could undo a brand. I didn't need to ruin her outright. I just needed to let the truth breathe. So I started small. I posted a short message on social media, calm, composed, devastatingly simple. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the people who sat at your table. No names. No accusations. But in a town like ours, people didn't need details. They already knew. Within hours, the message had dozens of comments. Words of sympathy. Private messages asking, "Is it true?" I didn't answer. Silence, I discovered, has its own gravity. A week later, I met Lydia by chance at the grocery store. She looked thinner, her hair pulled too tight, her smile brittle. "Claire," she said softly, as if my name itself might break. "Can we talk?" I looked at her, really looked. For years, she'd been my mirror, the person who reflected my jokes, my stories, my life back to me. Now, she was just another woman who'd built her comfort on someone else's pain. "I think we already have," I said, and walked away. Marcus, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate. He sent flowers, emails, even a long letter filled with apologies that sounded more like justifications. "We were lost," he wrote. "I made a mistake. I want to fix this." But I had learned something crucial. Some things aren't mistakes, they're choices. My plan wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no scandalous reveal. I'd let the truth and time do the work. Marcus's business depended on discretion, Lydia's depended on trust. Their choices would corrode both. In the meantime, I started reclaiming my space. I painted the kitchen a color he always said was too bold. I moved his books into boxes and filled the shelves with my own. Every small act felt like a declaration. This is mine now. One evening, Julia called to say the divorce papers were ready. "Once he signs, the assets are frozen until settlement," she said. I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine. The sunset stretched long and golden across the room. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim standing in the ruins. I felt like an architect again, not of a life built for someone else's comfort, but of my own liberation. The plan was working, quietly, inevitably. And though I didn't know it yet, the real reckoning for all of us was still to come. Revenge, when it's deliberate, doesn't feel like fire. It feels like ice, slow, controlled, and exact. Every move I made was quiet, almost polite. But precision has its own kind of cruelty. The first step was financial. Julia filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, Marcus's accounts were frozen, the joint credit cards disabled. His business partner called me later that week, flustered and apologetic. He said it's temporary, the man muttered. Something about a misunderstanding. Not a misunderstanding, I said, my voice calm. A correction. That same day, I sent Lydia a short, courteous email. Please remove my likeness from any marketing materials associated with your company. You no longer have permission to use photos taken at my home or events. I wish you well. It was brief, factual, but in her industry, those few lines were a public red flag. Within a week, 2 of her biggest clients quietly withdrew. Reputation, once cracked, spreads its fractures fast. Still, I didn't gloat. That wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was for them both to feel what I had felt, the sudden loss of control, the cold distance between who they thought they were and who they had become. Marcus called again. This time I answered. Claire, he said, his voice tight. You're destroying me. I almost laughed. You did that yourself. I'm just cleaning up. He sighed, the sound heavy and performative. I made a mistake. Can't we talk like adults? We are, I said. Adults face consequences. He went silent. I could almost hear his frustration, the realization that there was no script left where I played the forgiving wife. A few nights later, Emma came home from college again. We sat in the living room, the air between us easier now, softer somehow. He called me, she said. Dad. He said you're being harsh. I raised an eyebrow. Did he? She nodded. I told him you're finally standing up for yourself. For a moment, I felt something almost like pride. Not because I was winning, but because my daughter was watching me choose self-respect over fear. My final move was the fundraiser. It was the same annual charity gala where Marcus and Lydia had once stood together on that balcony, their secret hidden in plain sight. This year, I went alone in a deep green dress he'd once said was too much. I smiled for photos, greeted people with calm composure, and donated a sum large enough to earn a mention from the stage. Halfway through the evening, I saw them arrive. Marcus in a dark suit, Lydia a few paces behind, pale and tentative. Conversations around us rippled. I didn't need to say a word. Truth had already done its work. When our eyes met, I smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of serenity that comes from survival. Then I turned back to the people I was speaking with and continued my conversation as if he were invisible. That moment wasn't about punishment. It was about reclamation of dignity, of narrative, of the space they had once occupied in my mind. Later, driving home under a sky heavy with stars, I realized how quiet revenge could be. No fireworks, no spectacle. Just the steady return of peace, mine, not theirs. And somewhere deep down, I felt the first flicker of something unfamiliar but welcome, freedom without bitterness. Peace, I learned, is not instant. It doesn't arrive like a sunrise, it seeps in quietly, testing whether it's welcome. In the weeks after the gala, life began to reassemble itself, but not in the same shape. The dust was still settling, and I was different now, sharper at the edges, but strangely softer inside. The town had already made its judgment. People who once greeted Marcus with warm handshakes now offered polite nods. Lydia's office lights stayed dark most days. Word was, she'd lost 2 more contracts and taken a step back for her mental health. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt a hollow, uneasy sympathy, not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition that even betrayal carries its own ruin. Marcus tried to salvage what was left. He showed up one evening at the house, our house, standing on the porch like a man hoping for a miracle. He looked older, worn out. His tie was askew, his eyes tired. Claire, he said, please. I've made mistakes, but I still care about you. About us. There was a time when those words would have undone me. Now, they just sounded like the echo of a language I no longer spoke. Marcus, I said softly, you cared about the version of me who kept you comfortable. Not the one who knows who she is without you. He winced. You don't have to be cruel. I'm not, I said. Cruelty was the lie. This is clarity. He stood there for a long moment, waiting for me to open the door. I didn't. Eventually, he turned and walked away. I watched until his car disappeared around the bend. After that night, something shifted. The ache that had been my constant companion started to fade, leaving space for quieter things, curiosity, even hope. I began volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping with career workshops and financial literacy sessions. At first, it was just a way to stay busy. Then I started recognizing parts of myself in the women who sat across from me, the disbelief, the humiliation, the slow, fierce determination to rebuild. One of them, a woman named Teresa, said to me once, "It's strange, isn't it? How you can lose everything and still feel lighter." I nodded. Because what you lost wasn't really yours anymore. On weekends, I redecorated the house. Not to erase the past, but to reclaim it. I painted the hallway a deep ocean blue. Replaced the dining table that had hosted too many lies. Every brushstroke felt like a small resurrection. Lydia, I heard, had moved to another city. No goodbye. No apology. Just absence. Maybe that was her own kind of penance. I didn't wish her ill anymore. But I also didn't wish her well. I simply stopped wishing anything for her at all. Emma, too, began to heal in her own way. She called more often, told me about classes and new friends. Once she said, "You know, Mom, you're happier. Different. Like you're breathing again." I smiled. I think I am. Still, at night, when the house was quiet, there were moments when the old ache returned, not as pain, but as memory. The ghost of who I had been still visited sometimes, asking if it had all been worth it. And the truth? I didn't know yet. Because peace isn't justice. And freedom isn't the same as healing. But it was a start. And as I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun slip behind the trees, I understood something new. Revenge had never really been about them. It had always been about me reclaiming the parts of myself they thought they could break. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest edges. By the time the divorce was finalized, the papers signed and sealed, I no longer felt the need to look back. Marcus had moved into a small apartment near his office. Lydia had all but disappeared. The drama that once consumed my world had shrunk to a few lines on legal documents and a series of fading conversations I no longer replayed in my head. But healing, I've learned, doesn't ask for permission, it tests you. It waits for the quiet moment when you least expect it, and then whispers, "Are you ready to let go?" It came one morning in early spring. I was sorting through the last of the boxes in the attic, the ones I had avoided. Inside were relics of the life we had built. Photo albums, ticket stubs, letters, old anniversary cards. Every piece of paper was a reminder of promises made and broken. For a long while, I sat there, turning the pages of an old photo album, our wedding, our first house, Emma as a baby. We looked happy. We were happy once. The photos didn't lie. The people in them simply changed. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not sorrow, but gratitude. Gratitude that it had happened, because without the breaking, I would have never learned what strength felt like from the inside. I closed the album and carried it downstairs. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain. I built a small fire in the backyard pit and began feeding the photos in one by one. The flames curled around each memory, not with fury, but with calm. It wasn't destruction, it was release. Later that week, Marcus called. It had been months since we'd spoken. His voice was quieter now, humbled. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "Not for the sake of getting anything back, just because I finally understand what I took from you." I was silent for a long time. Then I said, "You didn't just take from me, Marcus. You took from yourself, too. He let out a breath, almost a sigh. I know. I see that now. And strangely, I believed him. Maybe people do change, just not in the way we hope. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, he replied, and the line went dead. That night, I dreamed of Lydia. We were sitting in our old cafe, sunlight spilling across the table. She looked tired, older, but peaceful. She didn't speak. Neither did I. It wasn't forgiveness, just acceptance. When I woke, I felt lighter. In the weeks that followed, I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, my lungs protested, my body heavy with memory. But with every mile, I felt something uncoil, something shed. One morning, as I jogged along the coastal trail, I realized I was smiling, not because life was perfect, but because it was mine. The reckoning, I realized, wasn't about making them pay. It was about taking back ownership of my own peace. Revenge had served its purpose. It gave me clarity, protection, and space to breathe again. But peace, true peace, only began when I stopped looking backward. I no longer needed them to suffer. I just needed them to fade. And they did. When I passed the mirror that evening, I barely recognized the woman staring back, not because she was broken, but because she was free. There's a quiet joy in starting over when no one expects you to. Not the manic rush of youth, not the desperate need to prove something, just the calm, steady rhythm of building a life that fits the person you've become. Months passed, and each one felt a little lighter. I sold the house, the one that held too many ghosts, and bought a smaller cottage near the coast. White walls, big windows, the scent of salt drifting through the open door. I filled it with things that made me smile. Second-hand furniture, wildflowers from the garden, stacks of books. There was no echo of Marcus's taste here, no trace of compromise. It was all mine. I started consulting for a local nonprofit that supported women navigating divorce and financial independence. At first, it was volunteer work, but soon I was asked to lead workshops. I taught what I'd learned the hard way: how to untangle finances, rebuild confidence, set boundaries. The first time I stood in front of a group of women and saw their eyes light up with recognition, I felt something click into place. I had turned my pain into purpose. Emma visited often. She brought her boyfriend once, a quiet young man with kind eyes and an awkward handshake. Watching her laugh at the kitchen table, I realized how far we'd come. There had been a time when I feared my choices had scarred her. But now I saw something else, strength mirrored back at me. "Mom," she said one evening, helping me cook, "you seem peaceful." I smiled. "I think I am." She paused, then added softly, "I used to think you were fragile. Now I think you're the bravest person I know." That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stood outside under the stars, wine glass in hand, and felt an ache that wasn't sorrow but gratitude for endings, for beginnings, for the way life reshapes itself when you finally stop clinging to what's gone. And then there was Daniel. We met at the community center, of all places. He was a landscape architect donating his time to help redesign the outdoor spaces. He was kind without effort, funny without trying. When he asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime, I hesitated, not from fear, but from unfamiliarity. It felt strange to say yes, but I did. Our first meeting was easy. We talked about work, books, travel, the small things that fill the spaces between bigger ones. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't volunteer it. There was something refreshing about being seen as who I was now, not who I used to be. Over the following weeks, we met again. Walks on the beach, quiet dinners, laughter that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. I didn't fall in love suddenly or dramatically. It was subtler than that, a warmth that grew slowly, like dawn seeping through a room. One evening, he looked at me across the table and said, "You've been through something, haven't you? But you wear it like armor, not a wound." I smiled. "Maybe it's both." He nodded, understanding. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Life was still imperfect, bills to pay, errands to run, old fears that sometimes whispered in the dark, but it was mine. Rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about weaving it into something stronger, quieter, more honest. I was no longer the woman who discovered betrayal on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was the woman who survived it, learned from it, and built something better in its place. And as I sat on my porch that evening, watching the ocean melt into twilight, I realized the truth that had taken me 2 years to find. Freedom doesn't come when you make them pay. It comes when you no longer care if they do. It's been almost 5 years now. Sometimes, when I look back, the whole story feels like it happened to someone else, a woman I used to know, someone softer, more uncertain. I still recognize her in the mirror sometimes, but her eyes are steadier now, her smile quieter, and her peace no longer feels borrowed. Life didn't end when the marriage did. It expanded. Slowly, almost shyly at first. The days grew into weeks that weren't measured by grief anymore, but by ordinary joys: the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of the ocean at dawn, the laughter of friends around a dinner table. The things that once seemed small now feel like the entire point. The nonprofit grew too. We've helped hundreds of women rebuild, women who came in shaking with fear, clutching documents and stories that mirrored my own. I sit with them sometimes after the workshops, listening. I never tell them every detail of my past, but I see in their faces that they already know. They recognize the quiet steadiness of someone who has walked through fire and come out the other side, still human, still kind. Emma is married now. Her wedding was a small ceremony on the beach, barefoot and beautiful. When she asked if I wanted to walk her down the aisle, I cried. She said, "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. I want your hand in mine." I saw Marcus there, standing off to the side, older and slower, but polite. We exchanged a few words, not bitter, not warm, just neutral. He congratulated Emma, and I thanked him for coming. For the first time, I didn't feel that electric jolt of pain when I saw him. I felt nothing. And in that nothing, there was peace. After the ceremony, Daniel and I walked along the shoreline. The sky blushed pink and gold, the waves curling at our feet. He slipped his hand into mine, easy, natural. "You're quiet," he said. "I was just thinking," I answered. How strange it is that something once so painful could lead to something this gentle. He smiled. Maybe that's how healing works. It doesn't erase the past, it teaches you how to live alongside it. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat by the water alone for a while. I thought about Lydia. I hadn't heard her name in years. Maybe she found her own kind of redemption somewhere. Maybe she didn't. I no longer cared enough to wonder. That, I realized, was the truest kind of freedom, indifference without resentment. The wind carried the scent of salt and new beginnings. I thought about all the women I'd met, all the stories I'd heard. Betrayal, loss, reinvention, all of them proof that endings aren't final, they're simply invitations to rewrite yourself. As the tide came in, I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to Marcus or Lydia, but to the woman I used to be. The one who doubted, who clung, who thought love meant endurance at any cost. I thanked her for surviving. And then I let her go. Now, when I wake in the mornings, there's no rush of dread, no ache of memory. Just sunlight filtering through linen curtains and the sound of waves in the distance. My life is simple, imperfect, and honest. Sometimes, Daniel brings me coffee in bed. Sometimes I wake alone, and that's fine too. I've learned that wholeness isn't found in another person. It's something you build quietly, piece by piece, inside yourself. If someone had told me years ago that betrayal would be the beginning of my freedom, I would have laughed or cried. But standing here now, in this quiet after everything, I understand. Losing them wasn't the tragedy. Losing myself was. Finding her again, that was the victory. And that, in the end, was the only revenge that ever really mattered.